Astrology. My name is Hummingbird, and today we're going to be talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, this is someone whose suddenly visible lack of integrity has been heartbreaking and disturbing to me personally over the past 9 months. And I do believe that her chart can help us understand this uncomfortable reality. The placements that make her so uniquely talented also make her susceptible to her own ambition, which I think in this case is blinding her to the bigger reality she's inside of, which is the collapse of the institutional structure that she is trying to climb. As I mentioned in my last video, and now even more so because we're talking about politics, I just wanted to give a disclaimer up front that my perspective and my type of astrology is not for everyone. And you might even be able to tell from what I just said that this isn't for you. So if it's not, just offering you an invitation to peace out from this channel. I am blunt about things, especially about collapse itself. And if you're looking for just like a nice light analysis of AOC's big three or something like that, this video probably won't meet your needs. But if you are here for a deep dive into the complexities of AOC's chart and her nuances as a human, this breakdown is for you. I've done lots of research. I have a perspective that acknowledges both her brilliance and her shortcomings. And towards the end of the video, I'll get into some theories I have about her psychology, her life story, her relationships within the Democratic Party, and why she is currently failing the most pressing moral test of our times. So let's get her chart up. And I will start by just going over the basics for people who are mostly here for that. And then we'll get into a deeper analysis of her life and her rise to power. So here's a summary of what we'll cover. We'll talk about her strong Libra presence. She's got Mercury, Mars, Juno, the Sun, and Lilith all in Libra. We'll talk about her Aries moon on the IC directly across from this Mercury. She has Sagittarius rising, and her Venus is also in the 12th house in Sagittarius. And then to a certain extent, although not all the way, we will get into this much bigger alignment here. So there is a T-square between Mercury, the moon, and Uranus. And there's also just this bigger alignment that includes a whole lot of different planets that is basically a cardinal grand cross in her chart, a big old cardinal cross with like 10 different planets involved. So I won't be able to get into the meaning of every one of these, placements that are part of this aspect, but broadly speaking, this cardinal cross means someone who is here to make an impact. A cross has squares and oppositions, so it has a lot of tense aspects, and there's just no way for energy like this to sit quietly and to not initiate changes. It really makes me think actually of manifestor energy in human design, even though AOC is technically a generator. But this is a combination of energies that is forward thinking and forward moving and just not a type to let any kind of status quo lie. And it's also a very big energy. So when you have a lot of outer planets involved, Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, Chiron, Jupiter, etc., it's a very big energy, but it's also very personal for her, especially when we zero in on her moon and her Mercury that are angular and square Uranus. So that piece I will get into more specifically. AOC's south node is in Leo in the 9th house, and I also won't get too into this, but I wanted to mention it. This third decan of Leo is related to the divine right of kings, and it's very common, it's like related to that theme, and it's very common to see that area of the zodiac active in charts of politicians. Trump is 29 Leo rising, Biden has Chiron at 28 Leo, RFK Jr. has Pluto exactly conjunct Juno at 24 Leo, and actually every president going back to at least George H.W. Bush has had a prominent placement in the third decan of Leo. Vladimir Putin also has strong placements here, Netanyahu has placements here. AOC has her south node here. So I do think that indicates that she is very much caught up in this same karma, maybe the karma of, what is currently playing out in the United States government. And also that's just a general kind of read of a Leo south node in the 9th house, is that you're gonna have past lives as royalty or nobility or part of the ruling class. All right, so the most stunning part of AOC's chart, I would say, is definitely this angular Moon-Mercury opposition. Her moon is 3 degrees of Aries right here at the bottom of the chart. It's conjunct the asteroid Pallas, and Mercury is at 2 degrees of Libra on the midheaven. And I won't talk about Pallas much, but I will touch into that at the very end. So one of the videos I came across in my research was an interview with 2 of AOC's biographers, which I'll link in the description box. And both said that she was known from a young age as an excellent communicator. They both named that as the distinguishing factor that really propelled her to leadership. In high school, she came in second in an international science competition. And one of the biographers was saying that she was particularly good. She was good at science in general, but she was particularly good at translating science, taking complicated or obscure scientific concepts and being able to translate them to, or like explain them to lay people. And of course, we've witnessed lots of times when AOC has articulated progressive arguments effectively and powerfully, when she has questioned smug white dudes and called out things in various ways that felt very powerful and clear and coherent. So that articulation is the strength of the Libra Mercury. And of course, in that, we're also feeling the passion and fire of the Aries moon that pours up from her core. Libra is the sign of balance and harmony. It's ruled by Venus. It likes nonviolence. It likes things to be clean and symmetrical and aesthetically pleasing. It's naturally very open-hearted and loving, and Libra has a good intuitive sense of how to create harmony between different personality types or different viewpoints. It's a very diplomatic energy. And Mercury describes how we communicate and express. So this incredible talent of communication that AOC is known for, here it is, front and center with this Mercury in Libra at the top of the chart. Top of the chart is the most public area of the chart, and planets here have a desire to express themselves in public. So we can see in that Libra energy, we can see the story about the science competition, and we can see how she's been known as a talented communicator, the way that she's shown up in her political career, at least until recently anyway. It's been like gorgeous communication, right? It is like pleasurable to watch her speak and speak to, these important issues. It's like watching the goddess herself. Of course, there are also shadow sides to Mercury in Libra. This public Mercury really doesn't want to look bad. It might really want to be liked. It might not handle direct confrontation very well. In general, with AOC's Aries moon and her Venus in Sag, her ascendant in Sag, those energies are pretty confrontational, and we've definitely seen that she doesn't have a problem being fiery or direct. But if that fire isn't fully activated because she's not aligned with her own integrity or values, if the fire is kind of stuck at an emotional level and not brought out into aligned action, then this Mercury could definitely get shaky, could get passive aggressive, could get childish, which I think is really what is happening now. Another quality of Mercury in Libra is an ability to code switch. And one version of this is that capacity for scientific translation, but it's also going to be extremely helpful in the political world. You're going to be talking to different types of people, and you'll need to articulate and present yourself differently, whether you're with rich donors versus your, working class constituents. Mercury in Libra is good at reading communicational clues and styles and fitting in. So just on its own, this Mercury in Libra at the top of the chart would be a powerful placement, but it doesn't fully explain what is so explosive about AOC. And that is the piece that comes from her Aries moon. So the moon represents the emotional body, the inner child. It's kind of like a core self, and it's usually a very private part of the self, although that can depend on placement. AOC's moon is interesting because being at the very bottom of the chart, it indicates that on one level, she is a very private person. But all this fiery Aries energy does need an outlet. And even if this moon is tucked away at the bottom of the chart, it has a lot of energy that will, want to be released through some kind of an outlet. And this moon has that outlet right there in Mercury. Mercury is in a position to channel the fire of this moon right out through the top of the chart. An Aries moon can be opinionated, it can be hard-headed, it can be very direct emotionally, it's naturally fiery and passionate about whatever it believes. So this is a natural part of AOC's personality that we've obviously seen in her political career. There's a New York Magazine article that I will link below and that I'll talk a little bit more about later in this video. But there's just a quote from it that I loved. They said something about her savant-like communication skills, and her moral ferocity propelled her rise. And yeah, that is Mercury at the top of the chart in the savant-like communication skills, and Aries at the bottom of the chart in that moral ferocity. So when this opposition is on, that's what it looks like. One thing I think is missed, maybe deliberately, when AOC's story is told, though, is how ambitious she is, and probably has been since she was a kid. With this Aries moon on the IC, I bet that she was precocious. I bet she has known that she is talented and has been determined to, get somewhere for most of her life. Probably since she was very young. She's been ambitious. She's had big goals. This Aries moon believes in itself. It is courageous. It has strong inherent self-esteem. It's got that warrior energy. And it just feels like a fire that was burning from the moment she came into this world. And this ambition, I think, is what is confusing her now. What she thinks she's destined for, which maps in a lot of ways to the top of the chart, which is about how you want to serve, the legacy you want to leave. What she thinks she's destined for, though, is not aligning with her integrity. And her Mercury in Libra and all these Libra planets are scared right now because they can't please anyone, which is honestly Libra's worst nightmare. Hopefully it's obvious that I am in favor of a free Palestine, and I think that AOC has proven herself basically a fraud with her both sidesing on the issue. But the funny thing is that the Zayos are not happy with her either. She's trying to code switch. She's trying to play both sides in a shadow Libra way, but it's not even working. She's losing supporters on both sides of the reality divide. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute when I get to her transits. Uranus is also a really important part of this Moon-Mercury alignment, but before I get to that, let's talk about the rest of the Libra in her 10th house. So not only is her Mercury in Libra, but there are these 4 other placements that I mentioned before, and her 10th house is fully Libra, cusp to cusp. So ideally, the 10th house speaks to the what of our professional mission, while the 9th house speaks to the why. So AOC has a lot of planets, including 2 personal planets that are in this what area. They're just going to be very career focused. And this is just another indication of her ambition. I think it's natural that she would want to focus her energy on her career and her public legacy. And with Libra, one layer of this is she does it in style. She does it looking good, sounding good, unapologetically feminine, her famous red lip, which is very, very Libra, ruled by Venus. But also Mars is here in her 10th house, and she is like an ass kicker in a pantsuit, right? Her whole persona, I definitely feel, is very 10th house Libra. Another element of this is networking as a way of getting places professionally. Libra is a natural networker. It likes interacting with people. It likes cultivating relationships and knowing people and introducing people to one another. And with Mars in Libra especially, networking is generally really important to get where you're trying to go. Technically, Mars is debilitated in Libra. It's not at its happiest because Mars' inherent nature is to charge forward single-mindedly. And in Libra, it has to accomplish its goals through relationships, through working with others, and through a balance of its personal goals and the goals of others. So that does sound very much like being in Congress. And AOC has done, she's done some of that crossbench bipartisan work. I also think that much more than is publicly known, she's networked her way around and inside of the Democratic Party structure itself. Juno here, Juno can signify jealousy, and especially like in Libra, I do think it can have kind of a mean girl vibe. Traditionally, Juno relates to marriage and partnership, and I do think there's something more complex here that points to AOC's partnership because Chiron and Jupiter are squaring Juno and Mars from the 7th house. But also maybe in the 10th house space, there could be some passive aggressiveness or some relationships that she keeps like a nice outer image on that aren't actually so pretty behind the scenes. And it kind of makes me think of her relationship with Nancy Pelosi. That actually might be the opposite of that. AOC stands up to Pelosi kind of for show in public, but she has also called Pelosi the mama bear of the Democratic Party. And probably has a much more agreeable relationship with Nancy Pelosi as colleagues than she presents in when she needs to take a fiery stand for something progressive. And honestly, that is the shadow Libra that I find so hard to stomach with my Mercury and Venus being in Aries. The person who will act completely differently based on who's in the room, and you might have a certain experience of them one-on-one, but if you see them, when there are other people around, you're kind of like, who is this person? Is this the same person that I was hanging out with yesterday? And maybe to that person, they're not being inauthentic, especially if it is a Libra, because it's their nature to merge and to match with other energies. But it can be really frustrating and toxic if that person is completely inconsistent, if they don't have some more individualized sense of self and you're trying to figure out who is it that I am relating to. On a deeper level, Juno relates to attachment dynamics. So I feel like there's just probably some interesting balancing acts that AOC performs and compromises that she makes in her relationships with her colleagues. Lilith, as I covered in my Kendrick video, Lilith brings in themes of sexuality, temptation, forbidden fruit, Christianity, the demonic, ostracism or being outcast, the grief and rage that kind of are associated with the dark feminine. These are all Lilith themes. And patriarchy, too, is a Lilith theme. And these themes are definitely present in AOC's professional life, the way that she has upended some patriarchal norms and expectations, the way that she's responded sharply to idiotic disrespect from her male colleagues and, really stirred their ire. That is a very Lilith thing to do. And also the way, at least on the surface, that the establishment Democratic Party didn't like her at first, that kind of outcast or ostracized energy that's associated with Lilith. Although, as I'll talk about later, I think most of that is kind of for show. So she's got to do something with all this 10th house energy. And I mean, she is doing it, right? She's using it effectively in pursuit of goals that I think ultimately belong to the Aries moon. But it's running into trouble now because she didn't know what she was getting into when she was networking with Zionists. And because what Libra can't handle so well, as I mentioned, is confrontation. Another shadow side of Libra is not being firmly rooted in its own values, just wanting to please whomever is around. It's the same code switching, but it's even on a deeper level because shadow Libra will adjust its own values for the sake of harmony in its relationships, or it will just not ask itself deeply what its own values are. And so especially because Chiron is transiting right now opposite all this Libra, the shadow is being activated in a big way. One other very interesting placement I do want to mention up here is the Centaur planet Nessus at 29 degrees of Virgo. So Nessus, the themes of his mythology relate to power and power dynamics and abuse of power and betrayal, and especially the kind of betrayal that is done blindly or accidentally. And to me, this Nessus, the very last degree of Virgo, so it's got an energy of, it's almost, anyway, it just makes me think of kind of an old wise person. And I don't actually necessarily think that there's wisdom, but I do think this Nessus looks to me like AOC's elders. I think that much more than is known, she has networked within the political world and especially inside of the Democratic Party structure, which has its own hierarchy and mechanisms basically for exerting as much control as possible over who gets to climb the ranks. There are older power holders in the party. They're not necessarily front-facing politicians or people whose names that you'd know unless you were inside of that world. But there are operatives, as they're called, who pull a lot of the strings behind the scenes. And I think AOC has some high-level mentors among them who want to help her climb the ranks. And I think right now, especially with Neptune opposite this Nessus by transit at the very end of Pisces, they're actually leading her astray. The centaurs represent areas of life where we have the potential to break cycles of harm, but they also can be areas where we perpetuate cycles of harm. And I think that AOC has mentors in the gerontocracy that we are living under. Bernie may be among them, although, like I said, I think a lot more of them are behind the scenes. But Bernie is a Virgo with Mercury at the exact same degree, which I think is interesting. But I think these mentors are guiding her from the old paradigm to compromise with the Zios in order to keep climbing the ranks. And ultimately, there's some kind of a betrayal there. I think both a betrayal of AOC by those mentors, an accidental betrayal, which is part of Nessus's mythology, and also a betrayal by AOC of, her motherfucking morality in her attempts to climb those ranks. Okay, so back to the T-square with Uranus in a square to the moon and to Mercury. Uranus adds an extra dimension of paradigm shifting energy to this potent inner planet moon-Mercury combo. Without Uranus, I think this could end up as a much smaller energy. It would still be someone with powerful communication skills, but maybe not so much of a desire to be a revolutionary. And there's also all this, just 4 placements in Capricorn in her first house, which is another sign of ambition that's just really built into her chart. Capricorn is a very ambitious sign, and all of these planets in the first house, it looks like a desire to move big energies, to build big things. And then there's also her Sagittarius rising and Venus. I was really surprised to see that AOC's Venus is in the 12th house. Venus in Sagittarius, Sagittarius rising, those placements completely make sense for her personality. But I was surprised to see a 12th house Venus because 12th house planets are usually less visible, than anywhere else in the chart. Planets there are harder to see. And I just feel like AOC has a very visible Venus. I feel like I can see, this fiery Venus part of her. It doesn't seem hidden. But I think she's probably able to bring it out of the 12th house more easily because of having a Sagittarius ascendant also. And the Venus trines her moon, it sextiles her Mercury, so it has those harmonious aspects that it can channel itself through. What I ultimately take away from this Venus, though, is that I bet that on a very personal, intimate level, AOC is a hard person to relate to. And I mean that with no shade, honestly. I bet that true emotional intimacy is a challenge for her. It's true for an Aries moon in general, or any kind of fire moon, really. It's not so much like, fire moons can express emotion. They can cry, they can, scream, they can let the emotion out. But it's not as good. A fire moon can struggle more to let people in. It's not as good at being vulnerable. And Sagittarius Venus also, even if not in the 12th house, can have the shadow side of wanting to overrun uncomfortable emotions or to power through them. It can kind of inadvertently get competitive in its relationships, and it can have trouble accessing deep empathy. So, and with fire signs in general, it's just their nature to put up a fight. It's just their nature to be kind of aggressive or competitive, and for that warrior aspect to take over. So dealing with a person like this in relationship, it's hard for them to let their guard down. It's hard for them to see their own flaws sometimes. The Aries moon, it has a very lone wolf type of vibe. And even though AOC has a ton of Libra, so she brings that to her life, and her life doesn't look lone wolf, but I bet that she feels that way at her core. There's a really different energy here in her 7th house, Jupiter conjunct Chiron, or pretty close to a conjunction here in Cancer. And Jupiter is the ruler of her chart, so whatever it's doing here in the relationship area of her chart is key. It's an important energy that she's going to have to manage her whole life. I have a little more to say about her partnership when I get to my just theories on her life, but broadly speaking, this combination of energies could look like a relationship that is emotionally comforting, the kind of thing where you're real lucky to have that person as your person. But also with Chiron there, it's going to be something that's actually a wound too. So with Cancer, with Chiron and Cancer, there can be emotional codependency. There can be a situation where one person babies or parents or needs to take care of the other person somehow. And combining that with the fiery energy of AOC that we talked about, her maybe, like not actually being able to open up emotionally that well or to let people in. There just could be some kind of a codependent situation there. So that is a basic rundown of the natal chart. I know I didn't cover everything, but I think that's all the most impactful points. So now let's get into her transits. There are 2 transits that are most obvious to me. Chiron is here opposite her sun right now, and the nodes are right now crossing her midheaven and her IC, crossing this angle of her chart. And that transit will peak right around the time of the election in November. So when the South Node makes a transit, it acts like a cosmic vacuum cleaner, inviting us to shed a layer of our own karmic skin. And so the South Node was crossing the rest of AOC's Libra planets in the fall, when she found herself thrust unexpectedly into this position where she can't please everyone. So there was a veneer of Libran niceness that has been stripped. The mask is coming off, and we see this other layer of the Libra that is basically like confused. It makes me think of the way she sounds in lots of clips from recently and not recently, pre-October 7th, when she's asked about Palestine, and she's just obviously grappling for the right thing to say. And then that video from a few months ago where she kind of freaks out in public when she gets confronted, she's off balance. This Libra energy is off balance. This is the shadow Libra that tries to make nice with everyone, that really wants to be liked by everyone, and so is not deeply rooted in itself or in any unshakable values. Or I would add for AOC, who wants to consider herself a leftist, it's also not rooted in a materialist understanding of history and empire. That's how it appears. So yeah, so there's this skin that is definitely being shed with her public persona. And then beyond what's visible publicly, I'm sure that this South Node transit is shifting AOC's own ideas about her 10th house, about what her professional life and legacy is supposed to look like. When I first saw that the South Node was crossing her MC at the time of the election, I saw that back in the fall, and I thought she might decide not to run, or she might lose if she does run. But I think she's definitely running, and I think she's definitely going to win, because I think the only way that she could lose would be at the primary level. So I guess now I think she'll just keep going, but the mask will keep slipping. And the layer of Libra that's so polished and put together is slipping off, revealing the shadow Libra that actually isn't sure where it stands and where its loyalties lie. And there's an even longer term process too that she's in the middle of, with Chiron transiting Aries, opposite all of her Libra planets. In particular, she's right in the middle of Chiron opposing her sun. So that transit has 3 peaks. The first one was in April of this year. The second one will be in November of this year. And the third final time that Chiron makes that opposition will be February of 2025. So this is very much an identity crisis. The sun is about identity, your sense of yourself as an individual, and Chiron is bringing in a crisis to that sense of self for AOC. How does she want to shine her light? I think it's really interesting to note this, because we're not even in the middle of it yet. We're early in the process of this transit, and she's going to continue going through this opposition for a while. With Chiron being in the 4th house, I would guess there are conflicts between her public career and her family of origin right now. There might be a separation or a disconnect from her cultural base. She might, just overall be pretty unrooted right now. And moreover, she currently lives with her fiance. His name is Riley Roberts. So there could be some lessons on that layer too, in terms of the 4th house being related to the home space and living situation. Riley Roberts, he's slightly mysterious. There's not that much information online about him. He and AOC met during college. It sounds like they dated off and on during the 2010s, and I think, they were definitely together permanently by 2016 or 2017. The New York Post wrote that he is from Paradise Valley, which is an extremely wealthy suburb of Phoenix, not just regular wealthy. I actually went to an event in Paradise Valley once at the estate of the Waltons, the Walmart family. So it's really next level wealthy. And if it's true that he's from there, he is also probably someone who's from a next level wealthy family. So he's described very vaguely in articles that mention him. He's described as being in tech, a web developer. He works from home. And there is a recent Forbes article that called him the black box of AOC's finances. So AOC's reported finances look very moderate. Forbes found her to have a net worth of a little over $100,000. But since she and Riley aren't married, there are potentially ways that she could channel money through him if she wanted to not look, rich as a progressive congresswoman. I'm not saying there's explicit evidence of this, but she definitely has incentive to keep her finances looking moderate. And I can't imagine that she would not have had some financial opportunities come her way since her rise to fame. I don't think she can technically get paid while she's in Congress for like speaking gigs, or, she can't hold any other kind of job. But there could be investment opportunities that come through people she meets. There could be various, behind the scenes ways that she could funnel work opportunities or contracts to Riley, if he actually is a web developer. He also could be employed within the Democratic Party structure or employed by a political action committee and getting paid for, consulting of some type, which would probably pay a lot more than what AOC gets paid in government. So they do live together. It sounds like they commute between New York and DC. And that fourth house, that home space, is what Chiron is activating. Typically, somebody with an Aries fourth house, it's going to be somebody who might like to live alone or really need to assert independence in their living situation. So they might be running into some wounds trying to figure out how to make that part of their lives work. Since it does, at least right now, it's also like impacting AOC's sun very directly. Yeah, I just wouldn't be surprised if there's some issue with the home situation that relates to the, kind of crisis that she is going through publicly, whether she knows it or not. Going back to Chiron and Jupiter in the seventh house. So there's a GQ article from around the time of the fall of Roe versus Wade in 2022, where she's talking about various things to do with feminism. And she says, I feel like I won the men lottery in my life, especially with her dad and with her partner. And that would make a lot of sense with Jupiter in the seventh in general, and the Cancer energy likely showing up as being a very nurturing partner, wanting and maybe attracting very nurturing partners. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, so that placement on its own would just be something that's really bringing in what you need in that area of life. When Jupiter is conjunct Chiron, there's an overlap between the expansion and luck that Jupiter usually brings and the karmic wound that Chiron represents. So it's kind of a too much of a good thing scenario. And as I said earlier, the combination of Chiron and Cancer does look like the potential for unhealthy emotional attachment. That doesn't mean the relationship is horrifically toxic or that either of them are making a bad choice by being in it. I definitely wouldn't be surprised if Riley is more ambitious and doing more behind the scenes than they publicly let on. But, I mean, she's lucky to have a man who's been able to stick by her during this enormous public rise. And so mostly when I look at this Jupiter-Chiron conjunction, I just send them my blessings. Ceres is also here in the seventh house. I made this visual a little bit more simple since there are so many signs there. So Ceres, you can't see her anymore, but she's also in early Cancer at 3 degrees of Cancer, actually, which puts Ceres also as part of this alignment. But that presence, it says that there is probably a theme of mother or caretaker relationships showing up for AOC in her life, maybe beyond her birth mother. She may have multiple mother figure mentors in her life, and she may also have sometimes behaved in ways that could be called betrayal towards them, because that's an important part of Ceres' story. That might also be relevant to her partnership, although I don't have any specific interpretation of that. All right. So finally, let's move on to my overall theory about AOC's astrology and why she is failing us. There's a story that's like the public-facing official story about AOC's life and her rise to power, which I think is basically true, but it's also very oversimplified. It's a nice politically convenient narrative, the bartender to disruptive congresswoman story, but I think there are multiple crucial events and other factors that are left out of that narrative, I think very deliberately, in order to disguise how deeply embedded in the political establishment AOC really is and has been for a long time. The official story basically starts with her winning the science competition as a senior in high school. She goes to college at BU, studies international relations and economics, which let's just say is definitely a good choice if you're someone who wants to climb the ranks of power. Her father dies in 2008 while she's in college, and the simple narrative says that when she graduates in 2011, she moves back to New York and becomes a bartender to help her mother pay the bills. Then she's an organizer for the Bernie campaign in 2016, finds her home politically in the Democratic Socialists of America, connects with the Justice Democrats, who are the guys who started trying to organize progressive grassroots campaigns after Bernie lost, and they help her organize her campaign. She wins her primary in 2018, and the rest is history. So there are a few significant things that this story leaves out. One thing that's rarely mentioned is that she interned at Senator Ted Kennedy's Boston office during college. That's not as prestigious as an internship at a senator's DC office, but it still indicates that she was connected to the political power structure early on. Also during college, she studied abroad in Niger as part of a U.S. aid-connected program. U.S. aid might ring a bell. This is a CIA-connected aid group that is in a lot of countries around the world and that was part of the horrific massacre committed by the Not Real Country during its rescue operation a while ago. So she was connected to a pretty slimy part of the establishment there during college, whether she knew it or not. And the official narrative usually also skips over a startup incubator that she was part of called the Bronx Sunshine Bronx Incubator that she was part of right after college that was apparently led by two Israeli guys. So there's sources for all of this linked below. I do not think AOC is a full-on psyop or anything like that. Actually, I think that she was maybe recruited by the darker side of politics but turned away from it before she actually got famous. Because of her talent, she very likely was scouted early on by various political actors. But I think in the period between 2011 and 2015, which was when Saturn was transiting all of her 10th house Libra stuff, I think she struggled during that time. And she has definitely said that before deciding to run for office was one of the darkest times of her life. And she was really depressed, working in the bartender job or whatever. So that does make sense for a very intense Saturn transit. I think she struggled during that time, feeling like she was meant for something big, but not knowing where she fit in. And then I think that when she connected with the Bernie movement in 2015, 2016, that was when Jupiter was transiting all of those Libra planets. And by the end of that transit, she had connected with the Justice Democrats and was leaning into her decision to run for office. So I also think that what is left out of her public-facing story is her ambition, which I have mentioned many times. The New York Magazine article that I mentioned earlier that had that quote about her savant-like communication skills and moral ferocity, that article goes into the story of her decision to run for office, and it has a lot of interesting details. It quotes her as saying, "I've always wanted to run for office and I'm going to do it," in the speech when she announced her run in 2017. But it interestingly also highlights her hesitancy in making that choice, and in general presents her rise as very spontaneous and unexpected. And it even says that her brother randomly, without telling her, submitted her name to Justice Democrats. And that's how she got connected with them. So that part kind of makes me LOL. What I can find on the internet says that she worked as a volunteer for Bernie's campaign, but there's not much information about it beyond that. And I just find it really hard to believe that she didn't connect with those operatives. The Justice Democrats are, they are Democrats who were into Bernie, kind of a Bernie bro situation. And then when Bernie's campaign didn't work out, they wanted to try to harness that grassroots enthusiasm for progressive candidates on the local level. So they didn't really, for a lot of different reasons, their project didn't really come together, but they did sponsor a few candidates in 2018. And AOC was I think she was maybe the only one that even won, but she was kind of like the shining star of that project. So I just find it really hard to believe that she wasn't already. I just think from college she was already kind of like visible in the establishment. And that article is also very interesting because it has a lot of details about a lot of things, but there's and it purports to tell the story of her rise to power, but there's no mention of her internship with Senator Kennedy, and there's no mention of the USAID study abroad in college. So the Kennedy internship is on her Wikipedia page. That's not like something that is explicitly hidden. It just is never mentioned in, any of the mainstream media pieces that tell her story. So I just think that there's a deliberate effort to hide her long-term connections to the political establishment and to paint her as this working class to celebrity politician American dream story. And I think it's a true story, but it's not the full story. The full story is that she has worked with the political establishment at least since college, and that she has wanted a political celebrity, maybe even felt destined for it, probably all her life. I've seen a few people in like the far left world say that her father has spooky connections, but I didn't find anything in my research about that. So if you know anything about that, please let me know. Please point me, in whatever direction I might look further. All I saw is that her father is an architect named Sergio. AOC does have Pallas conjunct her moon. Pallas is a very strategic war goddess. And it could make sense for there to be some kind of influence like that with her since early childhood because of that Pallas placement. But it could also have nothing to do with her father. And it, could just represent her own internal sense of strategy. Whatever it's connected to, it definitely, the Pallas placement is another part of the chart that I think reflects her personal ambition. So what I have not said directly in all this talk about ambition is that I think AOC explicitly wants to be the first female president of the United States. I think she feels destined for it, and I think she wants it. I think she really wants it. And I think that she also has advisors and mentors who want it and who think it can happen. And they probably have some long-term strategies and plans laid out, 10, 20-year plans, that kind of thing. I can imagine that they are scanning the landscape of the Democrats, and there's no other rising stars with anything close to AOC's power and charisma. And because they live in their delusional bubble and they can't see that the whole system is about to come tumbling down here in America, they think she's going to lead the Democrats to this history-making moment in another decade or two, and, they're going to be part of it. When I first saw AOC not taking a clear moral stance on genocide, and also when I saw the South Node transiting her 10th house back in the fall, I was like, why doesn't she just quit politics? She could leverage her celebrity outside of politics and maybe even have a much more powerful impact, and at the very least be able to speak freely. And I wanted to give her some time. I was like, maybe by the election she'll have woken up, she'll leave politics. That's what this South Node transit will be about. But now that she really has, I don't want to say completely failed to evolve, because she is like tiptoed, she's used the G word once or twice now. She's tweeted some like harsh words about AIPAC. But then she also hosted 2 rabid Zionists for a live stream to talk about the fake anti-Semitism at the protests, and so now that I see where she is at, I realize that she has gulped down way more of the political Kool-Aid than I thought. She doesn't just want to climb any ladder of power / capitalism. She wants to climb that ladder. And I think she really wants to be the one who achieves that historical accomplishment of being the first female president of the United States. And sadly, her history on the issue of Palestine does align here. Even before last fall, there were already a few very uncomfortable clips floating around of her being asked about the issue and really failing to have the clarity that she has on pretty much, any other subject I've ever heard her asked about. The DSA rescinded their endorsement of her this year, both because of her refusal to take a clear stance on the issue and because in general she has made many moves recently to align more with the Democratic establishment. Even in 2017, when AOC was this rising star and she was, saying I'm a democratic socialist, they debated whether or not to endorse her specifically because she wasn't clear on Israel. And to me, that says early on that even though she wanted to identify as a socialist or a leftist, her real allegiance was to the Democratic Party, and that was the way that she planned to climb the ladder. And that is, that's the Bernie path. That's the Bernie strategy. And I think when she came into closer contact with Bernie and the way that his campaign was operating in 2016, she was like, oh, I can identify as a leftist and embrace progressive goals and policies, and I can also still be a Democrat, and I don't have to be a third party candidate who has no chance at ever becoming president. I think she knew early on that having the support of the Zios and their money was important. And so she decided in a shadow Libra way to make that compromise. But she probably didn't fully understand the issue. She probably bought into a convoluted neoliberal version of it without looking deeper, because I'm sure she was learning about all kinds of different international situations. I can't find that she's ever commented on this, but I would think, she would have been in New York on 9/11 unless there's some reason she wasn't there. But I imagine if she was there, that she probably, swallowed the anti-Muslim propaganda easily at that time, like lots of us. And then most importantly, she didn't foresee that the not real country would start slaughtering children in the midst of her 10 to 20 year plan or whatever. She didn't realize that that early compromise would put her in such a morally untenable position. And I think she has mentors now, older mentors who are even more immersed in the old paradigm and the delusion of America's continued dominance, who are behind the scenes basically telling her to make a blood sacrifice, saying, yes, we know this is wrong, but keep on playing the game for now. At the very least, both sides it as much as you can so that you don't get on the bad side of the power holders, so you can climb the ranks of power and then make things better when you're in charge. Like I said, Bernie might be one of her mentors. I think there are probably others who are younger, not as young as her, but operatives who are in their 40s, 50s, maybe 60s, who want to tie their own legacies to the history that they think she's going to make. So what I think is that now AOC is in a predicament. The Chiron transits in her chart look painful. I don't think that she's a full-on psyop. I think that it's much more human than that. And I think it's important when we critique people that we recognize that the moral predicaments our system puts people in are a feature, not a bug, of the system itself. We might be quick to judge someone like AOC for how she's handling a situation that we ourselves absolutely cannot imagine being in. I'm not saying that to excuse or justify her choices. I obviously wish that she could see that she's propping her ladder against a crumbling empire, and I wish she would show some moral fortitude as a leader. But I just want to invite all of us, including myself, to hold a wider perspective too, and to let her failings be a reflection to us, maybe of our own compromises, our own ways that we are backed by the system into morally uncomfortable corners, and just the fact that it is the nature of the system to do that to us. So on that note, I will finish up this reading. I'm sure I missed some details, so please let me know in the comments what else you see about AOC's chart and transits and life and anything else. And I will be back next week with a new video, this time on everyone's favorite alien, Elon Musk. So if you're liking these breakdowns, please hit the subscribe button and stick around, and I will see y'all next time.